Hello, I am Michelle Chula-Lipkin, the Executive Director of the National Association for Media Literacy Education. I am very happy to introduce this keynote session entitled Digital Storytelling Across Mediums, Lessons for Engagement. And I'm thrilled to have Danielle Bainbridge here, who is the Assistant Professor of Theater, Black Studies and Performance Studies at Northwestern University. Thank you so much, Danielle, for being here. I will leave now and let you do your thing.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just so that I can get the slides going. Okay, great. So hello and welcome. My name is Professor Danielle Bainbridge, and I'm a professor, as Michelle mentioned, of theater, Black Studies, and Performance Studies at Northwestern University. Outside of my academic research, I'm also a web series host and creator, writer, historian, and filmmaker. And although today my scholarly and creative practice centers a lot around platforms like YouTube, Twitter, or X, and Instagram, this wasn't always the case. In fact, before I became a creature of the internet back in 2017, I would describe myself as somewhere between a Luddite and let's just call it aggressively analog. I preferred hard copy books to Kindles, rarely ever doom scrolled, and had a small social media following that was limited to close family and friends. I didn't even have aspirations of becoming an internet person or personality until the opportunity quite literally landed on my doorstep. In 2015, I was a graduate student in the middle of my PhD journey, and I was dissatisfied with academic writing. I found it challenging to adopt this new style, and I also found that academic writing wasn't enough to encompass all the stories I would like to tell. So I decided to take my creative writing practice seriously for the first time since I left undergrad and began writing again. Mostly, I was writing creative nonfiction with the occasional bad poem or short story. After winning a writing contest and publishing a few pieces, I decided it was time for me to build a professional website. But as a grad student, I wasn't exactly flush with cash, so I opted for a free template WordPress site. On the site was a short bio along with links to some of my fledgling pieces. The site was pretty pitiful, if I say so myself, but along with that information, I also had a short bio and picture up on my academic department's website. Flash forward to late 2016 or early 2017, and I get an email from our department's administrator telling me that someone claiming to be calling on behalf of PBS had left a voicemail for me on the department's landline. I went downstairs to our office and we had a hearty laugh at the improbability of the call, and I concluded that it was probably just a scam targeting desperate academics. Later that night, I told my mother the story, and she encouraged me to return the call, despite my doubts, on the off chance that this was a legitimate opportunity. In my head, the best case scenario was that they wanted a quote or something from my research as part of something they were filming. The worst case scenario was that it was, in fact, a scam. Well, I called back the number that they left, and it turned out to be a casting agent who had somehow found my meager online presence. She was looking to cast someone for an as yet untitled history web series that I would write and star in if I got the part. Well, the next few months consisted of sending in photos, videos, script ideas, and also doing a screen test. And just when I had given up any hope of being selected, I received an email on my 27th birthday in 2017 letting me know that I had booked the gig. And thus my foray into the world of online content creation and media began in earnest. Since then, I've created shows and videos that have reached tens of millions of viewers all around the world. My work has been used in classrooms and workplace training, with nonprofit organizations, and for personal education and entertainment. Everything I've learned about digital media, storytelling, and public facing work has largely been learned on the job, meaning I observed the work of others, asked questions, and stayed curious until I could find a way to effectively communicate online. Like most digital creators, there was no fixed roadmap or guidelines to help me get started. I relied on the teams I worked with at various production companies and media outlets to show me how things are done, and I owe those collaborators a debt of gratitude for giving me the education I needed to be successful. Today, I'm going to impart some of what I've learned from making digital media and teaching digital storytelling at the college level. So let's get started. During the pandemic in the 2020-2021 academic year, I was tasked with teaching a course on digital storytelling to undergraduate theater majors at my university. Although it seemed an obvious fit to teach a digital storytelling class entirely online, I found the prospect extremely daunting to say the least. A year earlier, when I proposed the new course for the major, I had envisioned an interactive lab of sorts where students could work on their projects in collaboration and have open discussion and sharing about the process of making new work. Now I was faced with the dreaded Zoom grid and students who were alternatingly depressed, stressed, and in some instances completely disengaged from this new educational norm. Nevertheless, the class was fully enrolled and scheduled to run, if not as originally planned. Yet, despite my trepidation at the onset, what ensued was one of my favorite classes to date. Each week, we began class with a short creative exercise, lecture, and reflection. The exercises varied, but each was designed to draw students into the process of acquiring advanced technical skills while also abiding by my steps for creating digital media. A typical assignment could look simple, like using your phone or camera, record a series of short clips of your environment, and edit them together to tell a story of the room you're in or your experience in that room. Students were encouraged to use what was on hand: cell phones, computers, simple apps, and tools to quickly create stories that narrated a wide array of experiences. Many of them spoke about feeling lonely at home without their college community or struggling with familial illness and depression. I encouraged them to express themselves in ways that felt organic and safe to them. But most importantly of all, I encouraged them to get up from their screens and go out of their comfort zones to tell the stories they wanted to tell. This could mean taking a walk around the neighborhood during the creative exercise time to record new footage, or even moving to a new room and dancing on camera, or reaching out to a family member or someone in their pod to record audio of a conversation. By stressing interactivity and human creation, we were able to create the lab environment that I strive for when I first devised the class. Students confessed during the class and after the course concluded that they enjoyed the excuse to get up from their computer chairs and interact with the world around them in new and interesting ways, even if that world had become quite small as a result of the quarantine lockdowns taking place all over the world. They were honest and vulnerable with their peers and with me about the challenges of the new landscape while also creating work that was alternatingly meaningful, funny, exciting, and inventive. They reminded me why the digital sphere is still such a powerful tool for engaging audiences and interacting with the world around us. At the end of the academic term, students turned in final projects that range from podcasts to choose your own adventure graphic comics to short stories, essays, skits, and more. They had clearly thought deeply about ways to engage their audiences online, and I was proud of their output. But more importantly, they reminded me that you don't need thousands of dollars and advanced technical skills to create successful work when you're just starting out. You can be armed with nothing more than a smartphone and a good idea to make things happen as a new creator. Years later, in 2023, I was at a conference in San Diego when I unexpectedly ran into a student from the class backstage. He had graduated and was now working as an audio engineer and sound tech, doing large events while also making experimental music. I remembered his final project for my class and how he incorporated sound into his artistic practices. He confessed to me that my course was one of his favorites and how meaningful it had been to him to connect substantially with his peers during a time of uncertainty and isolation. By coincidence, I saw another student from the class weeks later at a coffee shop who said similar things. The work of digital storytelling helped him feel more connected during a time of loneliness and widespread panic. It reiterated to me why I do this work and why it matters to the students I teach. Each one of them was able to find their voice through digital storytelling, and I felt honored to collaborate alongside them on this journey. But how did we go from those first rocky days of class to ultimately hosting a successful seminar? In this talk, I'll give you 5 tips to engage students creatively and effectively in the classroom while teaching digital storytelling. Those tips are: start with something familiar. Digital storytelling is just storytelling for a digital first audience. The medium matters, building essential skills. Build a foundation so that students can explore and complete the project. So, first, start with something familiar. First off, I'd say the biggest tip for getting students started in the digital media classroom is starting with something familiar to them. There will be plenty of opportunities to introduce students to new ideas, concepts, and material later on. But in my experience teaching this course, it's best to begin with something that looks and feels similar to things that they use every day. Early assignments in my class include telling a story about yourself using something you have on your person right now. This exercise is good for the first day of class as a quick and easy icebreaker. I ask students to find something on their person, like an item of clothing, a pin, an item in their bag, etc., and use that to tell a brief story about themselves for the class. It usually serves to open people up to sharing their work, which is vital to make this class run effectively, as well as giving the students a low risk way to laugh and introduce themselves to their peers. Another assignment would be telling a 60-second story using the platform of your choice. For this exercise, I ask students to use a social media platform that they're familiar with or use often to tell a story that takes approximately 1 minute to consume. This can mean making a reel, short, or TikTok, a series of connected tweets, or using platforms that are new to us altogether. More than once, I've had students introduce me to a new platform through this exercise. The point of this exercise is to reiterate to students that they are already storytellers and already adept at making things for a digital first audience in the sense that they interact with these platforms every day. If you're a K-12 educator and students aren't allowed to use social media in a classroom setting, consider using other simple tools like Canva, Adobe Spark, or choose your own adventure websites where students can tell short, effective, and interesting visual stories. Or if your students are more into audio stories, consider using free sites like Audacity or paid services like Audition to help them get started with this project. It's not essential that they build their stories in a particular platform for this phase of things, but rather that they master how to do the basics of storytelling. For example, telling a story with a beginning, middle, and end, and test their already established technical skills from being a generation that was born with so much technology at their fingertips. Another early assignment I give is for students to leave the classroom for 15 minutes and create a story using just their cell phones. During the 15 minutes, they can collect pictures, videos, sounds, etc., that relate to their story and quickly piece them together on their phone, or simply show them to the class and narrate what they're trying to get at with their ideas. Again, the point isn't to just establish new skills, but rather to gauge students' ability to tackle the assignments and give you, as the instructor, valuable information about what students' strengths are and what some possible areas for improvement are. So, before you launch into teaching and building essential skills, it's important to establish what digital storytelling even is. This can be tricky since there are plenty of working definitions floating around out there. But the one I usually stick to is digital storytelling is just telling and creating a story for a digital first audience. Now, although that definition may seem repetitive or obvious, it gives students an idea of what we'll be working towards in class over the course of the term. We all have some level of experience consuming digital first stories. This can include social media platforms, YouTube, streaming, websites, and interactive stories and games. Regardless of the medium, all of the stories in these various platforms were created with the idea that they would be consumed digitally or online in some way. This changes how we interact with the material and also what type of storytelling is possible. For example, if you write a traditional book, you are likely telling a chronological or at least linear story that will be consumed as a hardcover, paperback, or ebook. The original form of the book is the physical copy, whereas things like the ebook or audiobook usually come later. Conversely, when you create for a digital first audience, you're likely working with interactive media that people can comment on or otherwise engage with, where things are measured by streams, views, and likes rather than the number of books sold. And digital first stories are made with a specific digital medium in mind, whether it's animation, video, audio, websites, short form clips, or something else. And these various forms each have their own styles and conventions. Establishing this definition early on in the course helps to demystify the story making process and invites students to think more broadly about the types of media they like to consume online and what types of media they would like to create. For these class sessions, I offer lots of examples of different types of media projects that I break down and critique with my students. I give them websites, videos, podcasts, interactive sites, series, animation clips, audio projects, and more. But the real trick is that I never assign my own projects or work for students to critique. First and foremost, this is because I'm not interested in only seeing my own point of view. But most importantly, I do this so that students can give their honest opinions of the work. In class, I screen or assign for homework a specific piece or project. Usually, each student is responsible for giving an in-class presentation at some point during the class, so if they've signed up for a particular day, they're responsible for breaking down the piece for their peers, including coming up with at least 5 discussion questions. This allows students to guide the conversation while we discuss what worked in the piece and what potentially could be improved. Just like most creative processes, the planning phase is also essential in digital storytelling. Stress to your students that in order to sustain longer and more complex projects, there needs to be a fair amount of planning at the onset, like creating story outlines, inspiration boards, and using comparable projects to guide their upcoming work. In my digital storytelling class, for example, I have students create a project prospectus for the midterm, which is comprised of 2 main components: a list of resources and comparable projects in an annotated bibliography, and a project plan or outline. The comps list can be interpreted in a variety of ways. For example, students can list projects that have a visual style they'd like to mirror, or a soundscape they liked, or because it touches on similar content to what they're going to cover. I have them explain their reasoning for each source and then detail the project they plan to undertake and how they'll use it. By studying others' work from a critical perspective, my hope is to give students the ability to break down and analyze various artworks and points of view. When you're trying to get something made for the first time, it's important to point to similar shows and ideas that have already been made in order to show that your idea has legs and is set up for success. If you can say, well, my idea is similar to XYZ, but it has ABC twist, then you can demonstrate that your ideas have some basis in past successes while also distinguishing them from other competitors. So next up, the medium matters, building essential skills. Before you get started making your piece, you first have to decide what that piece wants to be. Is the information you're trying to disseminate better suited to a podcast or a video? Perhaps it would be better and easier to interpret as a website. Or maybe social media is the best place for your budding idea. Maybe a short TikTok or series of tweets will help you get the message across much better. When thinking about medium, you have to consider a few things. The first is that the medium should match the content in some ways. For example, if the information you have is very text heavy, perhaps you should consider written forms instead of audio forms. Or if the piece you're creating relies heavily on visual resources and film clips, you should consider using video as your medium. But outside of just basic mirroring of content and form, you should also consider which medium is likely to be engaged by the audience you want to reach. If you're interested in reaching a younger audience, places like TikTok and YouTube might be preferable than, say, an op-ed in a traditional media outlet. But if the information you're sharing relates more directly to a mature audience, then consider traditional media outlets as well. You should also spend serious time considering format, which is related to medium but not entirely the same. What you're aiming for is a format that engages your audience, highlights the information you'd like to share, and is sustainable for you long term if this project is a series or a longer term project. So you've determined which medium you and your students' projects will take, but then comes the task of building the essential skills to actually create that piece. Here are some questions to ask yourself and to keep in mind during this phase of teaching digital storytelling. First, what technical skills do you need to accomplish your task or piece? If this is something that requires extensive editing or assembly, consider acquiring those skills yourself. For example, if you want to make a weekly podcast but you don't know anything about audio editing or mixing, consider looking into information on those tasks. I highly recommend the platform LinkedIn Learning, which I use with my own students. The service offers easy to follow tutorials on how to acquire advanced technical skills, and oftentimes you can get it for free through your public library. They're great for beginners and easy to follow and use. Whatever you end up deciding to do, make sure it's at a technical level that is comfortable to you and your students and sustainable in the long run. Additionally, leave room for students to teach you something new in terms of technical skills. I've had students in class create projects with platforms and software that I wasn't familiar with. It's okay for students to bring these resources to class as long as it meets the project requirements. This gives students more ownership over the process in the long run. Next, how long will it take to complete your project? And by the time you're done, will it still find a successful audience online? This is because digital media tends to move pretty quickly and topics change or roll over fast. You have to make sure that by the time you're done with this project, it will still be relevant to the conversations you want to enter into. Teaching time management is essential in the digital storytelling classroom if you want students to be able to use these skills outside of class. Some projects take a few minutes, others take a few hours, and others still can take days or months to accomplish. Teaching students how to manage their time with the technical skills they have will set them up to be successful later on. And finally, what vision do you and your students have for the overall piece or outcome? Although graphics and set design are nice, they aren't essential to creating an aesthetically pleasing and informative video. Think of some of the basics like, is my camera at a good level and location? How is the lighting or sound quality in the room I'm recording in? How will this look, sound, and feel once it's completed? Having a general sense of your vision for the piece will help you to gather the rough materials and footage you need to make the final outcome successful. Emphasizing the basics can help students feel empowered to tell their own stories and realize that not everything has to be as lavish and complex as some of the top digital creators to make an impact online. I know people with successful channels that consist mostly of them talking directly to the camera with limited editing or graphics. I've seen folks create successful podcasts using a microphone attached to a cell phone and free software. The story is still at the heart of everything you're teaching your students, and that story can be expressed in myriad ways. There are also infinite numbers of free tutorials and videos online teaching complex technical skills on platforms like YouTube and others. Make yourself familiar with them and share them widely with your students. So, next is building a foundation so that students can explore. I once had a professor in grad school tell us a story about teaching. He said that when there's a playground in the center of an open field, children will tend to cluster around the playground instead of spreading out to the edges of the field. But if that same playground in the field has a fence built around it, children will tend to spread out further to the edge of the fence. His reasoning was that, like the children in the story, students will be more inclined to explore creatively and intellectually if there are some guidelines and signposts along the way than if you just say, you're free to do anything you like. This is why building in guidelines to the final assignments and assessments is critical for student growth in digital storytelling. I tend to leave things like subject and themes up to students to decide, but I set things like time limits. For example, videos and audio clip have to be 5 to 6 minutes, interactive stories should take about the same amount of time to read, etc., so that students can be creative within constraints. If you're an independent digital creator, then the world is literally your oyster, and you can make or create anything with no guidelines. But in a classroom, setting the guidelines helps to ensure that students can focus on building their technical and storytelling skills without the pressure of reinventing the wheel. There's a wide array of topics and styles you can cover in digital storytelling, but most important of all is to tell something that is compelling and engaging. Think of the things you like to look at online. What was the last piece of digital media you consumed or shared with a friend or a loved one? Although the answers to these questions can seem inconsequential, like a cooking video, a TikTok, an AITA post on Reddit, they probably all have one thing in common. They cut through the digital noise to grab your attention and time, even if it was just for one moment or 60 brief seconds. When teaching these skills to your students, you want to encourage them to think of things like medium, platform, and format so that they too can build successful pieces. And lastly is creating the piece or completing the project. So you've done everything you could to teach your students the essential steps to creating digital media. You've gone over the basics of storytelling, provided guidelines, built essential skills, and identified your medium and format. Now it's time to make the piece, and perhaps most importantly of all, complete the project. There's the old cliche that ideas are easy and execution is hard. Well, that remains true for digital media as well. Everyone has at one point or another had an idea for a podcast, web series, online comedy video, or platform. The real challenge is motivating students to finish their projects and launch them successfully into the world. By starting with some of the small, achievable assignments I mentioned earlier, then transitioning into more rigorous and technically challenging tasks, you'll help to build student confidence and help them formulate what kinds of pieces they would like to create. In the same way a student develops a thesis for an essay, your students will be developing themes, through lines, and ideas for their digital pieces. Perhaps that means mirroring a popular format they've already seen online, like a response video, a short, a choose your own adventure, a webzine, or comic, and adding a twist. Or maybe that means creating something that responds to another piece of digital media. Or perhaps they'll be creating something really out of the box and unfamiliar to most audiences. Whichever path they choose, our role is to support their creativity rather than to critique it. Because the more things you finish, the greater your skill set and confidence will be over time. So, for this final section of my talk, I'll focus on some helpful tips, resources, and guidelines for creating digital storytelling pieces with your students. So, first, the tips. As an educator, familiarize yourself with the digital landscape. Consume widely so that you have a working understanding of trends and directions that digital media is taking. Next, figure out what your students are interested in and go from there. Let your students' interests guide discussions and class assignments. Don't assume that all of your students are super tech savvy or obsessed with online subcultures. Meet them where they're at. I've had students with social media followings and students who consciously don't have any online presence. But both of those students, and both of those types of students, were able to find successful pieces in the digital storytelling classroom. Leave room for students to teach you and each other. They are usually way more clued in than we are about what's trending and going on. Leave room to say, I don't know, but I welcome you to introduce that to the class. Encourage them to get away from their screens. In order to have a story or idea worth telling, you first have to have experiences in the real world. Try to build exercises that blend digital and real world perspectives. So next, some general guidelines. First is create boundaries and guidelines. Creativity often comes from constraints because it gives us a starting off point. Next, a mixture of in-class short assignments and longer homework assignments helps students develop practical skills through trial and error. I have a variety of 20-minute in-class exercises designed to target particular skills, as well as longer tasks for at-home work so that students can practice at their own pace. Next, have short assignments funnel into the longer homework assignments. Give students optional opportunities to share their work with their peers. Peer feedback is vital to improving your skill set and storytelling abilities. I also have found that students value the feedback of their peers, often even more than my feedback. So encourage communal feedback when possible. And finally, try to build a culture where it's okay to fail in public, at least a little bit. Every artist has at one point put forward something that was less than successful, and I think bravery and grit are vital to making any kind of creative work. And finally, some resources that you should make yourself aware of. The first is LinkedIn Learning, the service I mentioned earlier. Next are YouTube videos teaching technical skills. Programs like Audacity, DaVinci Resolve, Adobe Premiere Pro, Audition, Adobe Spark, Canva are all great programs, and many of them are free, which means it's easier than ever for students to build technical skills at home. You can also find resources and lesson plan ideas online, but these won't be tailor-made for your class. So figure out what your students like and are interested in and tailor material from that starting point. As an educator, I'm still learning alongside my audience how dynamic a learning tool storytelling can be. One of the most interesting parts of my former work on the web series PBS Origin of Everything was getting feedback and responses from students, teachers, and self-taught independent lifelong learners about how they were effectively integrating YouTube into their own learning styles. In June 2019, I had the chance to speak on a panel of 3 young YouTube creators who were all in high school and creating online content that sparked their wide-ranging curiosities. Some of their uploads were about lifestyle, their hometowns, their school community, their online gaming addictions, and comedy. They described having to teach themselves video editing, creative writing, graphic design, directing, and how to use sophisticated equipment, sometimes in collaboration with their high school teachers, in order to make it all work. But they also mentioned the soft skills they learned from making channels with their friends, starting as young as 13 years old. These students were moderating comment sections to keep their online and offline communities safe from harassment so that everyone who visited these spaces could learn and enjoy their work. They learned about keeping schedules and accommodating each other's strengths and vulnerabilities as they navigated an increasingly vast and complicated online culture. But the best information these amazing high schoolers taught me is that there are more dynamic ways to use YouTube as a learning platform, in addition to screening educational content in class. They enjoyed the hands on experience of creation just as much as they loved it when teachers screened interesting creators in the classroom. One mentioned that learning as a YouTube creator made him feel like complex technical skills were attainable. Another mentioned that he wanted YouTube as a supplement to his teacher's lessons, but not as a replacement. And teachers who write me on either the Origin of Everything YouTube channel or via email describe equally innovative ways that they use our content in the classroom to supplement their vital work. One of my favorites was a middle school communication and rhetoric teacher who dropped me a line saying that she screened our videos in class and used them to model different types of writing styles. Her students would watch the video, then do short writing exercises alongside their teacher that helped them acquire infinitely valuable skills like how to effectively structure an argument and how to engage audiences through their writing and public speaking. As an educator myself, I'm still learning every day alongside my audience and online community how we can make digital media an even better tool for serious and active learning, particularly because it's a tool that comes into people's homes and cell phone screens without traditional barriers to educational access like cost and location. I'm happy to be an educational content creator at a time when the number of channels is growing every day and the types of shows being made and the topics being covered are expanding. Although digital media and storytelling is its own unique sphere, some of the strategies you use to create digital media are the same strategies you use in your daily lives as professors, educators, and researchers. You still have to apply rigor to every step of the process in order to create fun and reliable digital resources with your students. You still have to use your skills as a storyteller and narrator of complex ideas. A lot of these skills we've already learned through research or through our experiences in the classroom. The difference in creating digital media, therefore, is not in content or perceived rigor, but rather in form and packaging. Thank you so much for listening to my talk on how to teach digital media, and thank you so much for having me.